Welcome to the Quantum Human Podcast, where we discuss everything related to being a human on the path of empowerment. In this series, we will explore the content of my first book, Quantum Being, in a fun and conversational way. If you like what you hear, grab a copy of my book from an Amazon site near you. Its title is Quantum Being by Hisham Atala.
Have you ever, really paused to think about what happens when life actually ends? Or what decides if a species sticks around for ages or just vanishes?
Yeah, the big questions.
I feel like we've got a decent grip on these things, but what if we're just seeing part of the picture?
That's exactly where we're heading today. We're looking at ideas drawn from the book Quantum Being.
Right. And our mission really for this deep dive is to explore what this book calls the uncomfortable question of consciousness.
It definitely pushes back against some standard assumptions.
It does. Assumptions about life, death, even evolution. We're aiming to pull out the core ideas and see, how they might change the way you think about it all.
And to do that, we'll touch on how the text views death and evolution. Its arguments for, a much broader idea of consciousness.
Okay.
And maybe some of the limits it sees in how science and religion currently tackle these things.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The Quantum Being material starts by questioning something pretty fundamental, how we understand death.
Yeah.
The book suggests we mostly see death as just a material phenomenon. Basically, the body stops working, the physical end.
It says something similar about evolution, right?
Yeah.
That our usual understanding is very physical.
Exactly. We look at fossils, track physical changes over time.
We do explain extinction through physical stuff. Asteroid impacts can't adapt physically, lose the competition for food or space, that sort of thing.
But here's the twist the book introduces. It argues that focusing only on the physical side of death and evolution means we're missing something huge.
Consciousness.
Bingo.
Consciousness.
The text really hammers this point home, that you can't properly understand the self, your own being, without putting consciousness front and center.
It even suggests that maybe the reason we struggle to grasp our true self is because we're a bit hesitant to really face what consciousness might be.
A reluctance. And this reluctance, the book claims, affects how we even define sentience or awareness.
Yeah, it challenges that common idea that, humans are sentient, maybe some higher apes.
Yeah.
And that's about it. Right. Suggesting we might be ignoring evidence that points to something broader.
And it critiques some of our methods, like the mirror test.
Ah, yes. The mirror test, where recognizing yourself in a mirror is seen as the gold standard for self-awareness.
But the book asks, is that fair? Is that the only way to be self-aware? What if your sense of self isn't tied up in how you look?
It's a good point. What if it's more fundamental?
Well, the book offers other examples. Think about an animal searching for food. Isn't that showing awareness of its own body, its needs, its survival?
Or fleeing from a predator. That seems pretty clearly like an individual wanting to preserve its own existence.
So the book kind of puts it to you, the listener. Do these basic drives, finding food, avoiding danger, count as self-awareness in other creatures?
Or do we stick to our narrower, maybe human-centric view? It's a direct challenge.
And this ties into how we see intelligence too, doesn't it?
It does. The text acknowledges, sure, we're finding amazing abilities in dolphins, octopuses, crows. That's becoming more accepted.
But it questions the definition of intelligence we often use.
Right. Often it's about, using tools you pick up or solving puzzles we set for them.
But the book says, hang on, what about the intelligence inherent in nature?
Like what? What examples does it give?
Well, think about a bird building a nest, weaving twigs together perfectly.
Okay.
Or those incredible birds of paradise creating these complex displays with leaves, berries, all sorts of things just to attract a mate.
Intricate stuff.
And even microbes, developing new enzymes, basically, inventing new biological tools to fight off antibiotics.
That's adaptation on a chemical level. And you could add salmon finding their way across huge oceans back to one specific stream.
Or bees building honeycombs, that perfect hexagonal structure, incredibly efficient.
So the question the book poses is, why don't we usually label these actions as clear signs of intelligence? They involve problem solving, adaptation, construction.
It's a powerful question, and it leads directly to the book's really big, maybe even radical claim,
Which is?
that consciousness isn't just in humans or animals or even just life as we typically define it.
Okay, go on.
The book, Quantum Being, asserts that consciousness is, well, everywhere, in everything.
Wow. Okay, that's a major shift. So everything has some level of consciousness. Sentience.
That's the idea presented. And it even suggests many things might be more aware in their own way than humans are.
So if you accept that premise, even just for argument's sake, universal consciousness,
Right.
it throws up some huge questions about death, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If consciousness is in everything, what happens to your consciousness, my consciousness, when our physical body stops?
Does it just wink out? Vanish? Or does it continue somehow?
And what about a whole species? If the last dodo dies, does the dodo consciousness just end?
Those are profound questions.
Oh.
But the text suggests maybe focusing first on the individual.
Okay, yeah. So on that individual level, how does the book see current science and religion handling this question of consciousness after death?
Well, according to Quantum Being, the mainstream scientific view basically sees consciousness as a byproduct of biology.
Right. Generated by the brain, complex nervous systems. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's likely limited to humans, maybe some other complex animals.
Yeah.
And when the biology stops,
Consciousness stops. End of story.
that's the general picture it paints of the scientific consensus. And it points out how things like intelligence in other creatures often get labeled as instinct.
Just biological programming again, not real consciousness.
Right. And even those microbes fighting antibiotics, the book's science often calls that just random mutations.
Even though they consistently work, they achieve a purpose survival.
Precisely. The book questions that label, random. It asks why there seems to be a reluctance to see it as potentially purposeful, adaptive, intelligent action.
And it draws a sharp comparison there, doesn't it?
It does. It basically asks, which is smarter? Facing a new threat and figuring out how to adapt, or just sticking rigidly to the old ways and refusing to change?
Which approach leads to survival versus extinction?
Yeah, and it uses this analogy of, say, a microbial leader refusing to adapt its enzymes to a new drug. That colony is doomed, right?
Right.
The book calls that refusal to adapt energy stagnation.
And it connects this directly to humans, to leaders, or maybe whole ways of thinking that insist consciousness is purely physical and ends at death.
The suggestion is that, by clinging to that view, they might be failing to adapt to, well, maybe a bigger reality, and risking their own kind of stagnation or death in the book's terms.
Okay, so that's the scientific perspective as the book portrays it. What about the religious view?
Here, the text describes the more common belief involving a soul, something non-physical that survives the body's death.
Yeah, the idea that this soul then faces some kind of judgment, leading to heaven, hell, reincarnation, depending on the tradition.
And the book acknowledges that this is a deeply held belief for many, framing life as a sort of proving ground for the soul.
So you have science saying consciousness ends and religion saying a soul continues. Seems like a direct conflict.
On the surface, yes, a contradiction. But the text points out something interesting, a kind of common ground.
Oh, what's that?
It argues that both views, in practice, often end up defining a human being primarily by their physical body. Well, science sees the body as the generator and endpoint of consciousness. And many religions focus on the eventual fate of the body too, resurrection, for example. Even if a soul exists separately for a time, the body remains central.
Okay, I see that. But their approaches are still very different.
Hugely different. The book characterizes science, ideally, as evolving based on new evidence, though it argues science is currently stuck within purely material limits.
Whereas traditional religions often rely on scripture seen as fixed, unchanging, divinely inspired truth.
Exactly. And because those ancient texts didn't really address consciousness or evolution in modern terms.
The book suggests that traditional religions tend to avoid digging too deep into those areas.
That's the argument, that exploring them fully might raise questions that seem to contradict Scripture, potentially shaking the foundations of faith, opening a kind of Pandora's box.
And the book labels this reluctance, this sticking to the established texts, despite new questions, as another form of
Energy stagnation.
Yeah.
Another way of resisting evolution, in a sense, leading to its own kind of conceptual death.
So, the bottom line, according to Quantum Being, is that both mainstream science and traditional religion, in their own ways,
have tended to ignore or downplay evidence that doesn't neatly fit their existing models.
a resistance to information that challenges the status quo.
Which, the book argues, hinders their ability to evolve, to expand their understanding of what reality might actually encompass.
Okay, so wrapping up this part of our deep dive into the quantum being ideas, it's really throwing down a gauntlet, isn't it?
It absolutely is, challenging core ideas about death just being physical,
Evolution being just about bodies adapting or dying out.
and consciousness being confined only to certain life forms, primarily us.
Yeah. The big takeaway seems to be this assertion that consciousness might be universal, literally everywhere.
And that holding on to narrow views, whether they come from science or religion, as currently practiced, can lead to this stagnation, a failure to adapt and grow.
So it leaves you, the listener, with a pretty provocative thought to chew on, doesn't it?
It really does.
Which path is ultimately better for survival, for expansion? Sticking rigidly to what we think we know now.
Or being open, adaptable, willing to incorporate new evidence, even if it radically changes our view of the universe.
Yeah. What does it mean if consciousness truly isn't limited by flesh and bone? Something to definitely think about.